All right. Great to see you.
Great to see you, Brian.
Thank you. Super excited about this one. Glad to see everyone starting to join in here. We'll go ahead and get started here. Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Murphy. I'm the CEO of Smartling, and welcome to our third episode of Smartling's Masterclass Series. I couldn't be more excited for today's masterclass. Here we are with Anna Schlegel, a powerhouse and legend in localization. Anna is a globalization executive at universalization.ai. She's a former leader at NetApp, VMware, and Procore, a member of the Parliament of Catalonia, co-founder and president of Women in Localization, and a Stanford-trained neuroscientist. Anna started her career as a team of one, learned how to build internal boards, navigated constant reorganizations, broke through to the GM level, and now serves in Parliament and on corporate boards while running companies and investing. She's done it all and seen everything. Today is an unfiltered, tactical conversation about how she built her way into running Fortune 100 localization programs and earning herself a seat at the table. Through real stories, we're going to learn today practical techniques for building stakeholder networks, earning executive buy-in, and maintaining momentum, even when your team gets cut, your boss changes, or you get moved to a different org. This isn't theory. It's the playbook Anna's used to navigate reorganizations, unified siloed teams, and build influence from zero, even from teams that don't want to hear from you. So, Anna, welcome to Smartling's Masterclass.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much, Brian. Happy to be here.
Awesome. I know. I'm super excited for this one. This is going to be great. All right, we'll dive right into it. So at NetApp, you were a one-person team, which is often the case for many localization managers, many folks that are on the call right now. How did you get stakeholder buy-in? What were your first moves?
Well, first move is not to panic. I was hired as a senior manager, and when I left the company, I was a global vice president. So this is the journey of, usually when I get into a company as mainly one person, I've done this 7 times. This is why I think we want to talk through this. When I got into NetApp, I was one person. I was hired as a senior manager to take care of the internationalization of the web. And usually I stay 1, 2, 3 months doing the job that they tell me that I have to do and getting to know people and doing a lot of get to know you lunches and stuff like that. And what I did at NetApp that worked really well is I did my own mapping of who was important and nice in marketing, who was important and nice in product, in legal, in HR, in IT, in customer support. So I went throughout the company and I would just ask like, hey, who's a good collaborator? So without them knowing, I started calling them my personal board of directors. So I created my own board of directors. And this is pre, ChatGPT and AI. So I had to think through all of it. And I created, I believe it was 8 sessions throughout 8 months. And I emailed all of them and I said, hey, my name is Anna Schlegel. You don't know me, but I really want to get to know you and understand how your department goes global. And they showed up. I think probably the most difficult thing was to make sure that most of them would come to the phone calls or the meetings, probably was in-person meetings, but I came really well prepared. I said, hey, session 1, I'm going to tell you what localization is, what we do, and why it's so important. And I came in with a lot of data at NetApp, right? Because data was everything for NetApp. How many international customers do we have? How much revenue was coming in from the States versus outside of the States? What countries were bringing in the most revenue? What countries I thought that we could potentially get in? And I made them all feel very special. So I was super nice to them. And I made it more like an interview, like, hey, Susan Palotelli. Hey, Susan Palotelli, if you ever hear this, right? Like, what's your job? What do you do? What countries are you focusing in? Have you ever done localization? And I did this with each one of them. And what was really cool after this first session is many of them had never talked before. So session 2 was like, okay, let's go deep into marketing. Session 3, and I made them all go deep into their departments, and I wanted the others to listen, and they started making the connections. I was just like a journalist, like not a problematic person, not telling them you should, no, I wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
That was not the approach. To the point that when I was done, I made director already within those first months, because my boss was like, they're telling me, you're doing all this stuff. And so I asked them if they could continue being my board of directors. And basically, my boss asked me, like, what do you need? And I said, well, this much money, and I wanted to start hiring. And we created these internal account managers to follow through these people. And then we created the typical stuff, right? Like, what countries do we want to focus on? And then very, very important was to tell them, like, the persona that NetApp was selling into. We had different personas, right? So we started designing those personas and that kind of stuff. So that's the first thing that I did that worked really well. So non-threatening, create sessions where they can learn. It's like, hey, do you know that French is spoken in Canada, and it's spoken in Switzerland, and it's spoken in France? And if we could use French in these countries, we would do so much better for the customers. And so I went in as a journalist a little bit, and I went in giving data and giving some gentle suggestions.
I love that analogy of going in as a journalist. A lot of people that know me know that I'm a big believer in you have to have intellectual curiosity. And so going in and being curious about, what are your goals? Like, what are you guys trying to accomplish? What's important to you? Gives you such important context for enabling you to do your job. And frankly, it's a tremendous relationship builder, right? Oh, this person actually is interested in what I have to do. They're not telling me, they're listening and asking questions. I remember when my company got bought by eBay, and I got put into eBay in a leadership role. And the first thing I did was very similar. I just kind of went around. It was a matrix organization. I couldn't do anything by myself. I was General Motors of eBay. I was general manager of eBay Motors, right? I could do very little on my own. I needed marketing, product, sales, et cetera. And so I went around and made sure I understood what all of their goals were, and then layered that into my goals. And so as a team, then we became enormously successful. And, by the time I left eBay, I was running all of the vertical markets globally. And I think it was really because I had that intellectual curiosity to ask, understand goals, and be able to create these organized goals. One of the suggestions that I often give to localization managers is, I think that we, when I say we, like localization managers, are very good at understanding what their tactical goals are: speed, quality, cost, right? When you ask them, what are your company's goals? You kind of get a lot of like,
Stare. Yeah. You
right?
have to ask folks. One thing that I learned very quickly is I have to make them very successful.
Yes.
And me, in the background, I was nobody. The first few years I was there, I was like just working away, making them super successful. It's like, oh my God, you got a new customer because of. And so you have to make it a win-win. You obviously have your personal goals, right? And some of the goals inside the company is like, you want to keep your team, and you want to keep your budget, and you want to do great quality and all those things, but you can't explain that to them, right? And also, you work for the company. You need to make the company super successful. And so what's your span of control is to make these other people successful through localization, internationalization, global strategies, right?
Absolutely.
So making them very successful. Like, how is it going? How else can I help you? Can I introduce you to somebody in Italy, right? Do you want to talk to the country manager in Brazil? Because many folks don't have those relationships, but localizers do, right?
Yep. If you guys want to advance your career, this is gold right here. It's amazing, and I love this. Let me ask you a question. Just to follow on that a little bit. Did you make any mistakes, or what mistakes do you see other one-person teams try or make when they're trying to build influence?
Yes, I did do a pretty bad mistake at VMware. So when I was at VMware, because I had already done this in a couple places, I was already thinking, or I was of the mind that globalization teams needed to be with content strategy teams. I wanted the content strategy team and the globalization team to unite and be the same thing. And I went too fast. They didn't like it. You know, the senior director at that point of Tech Bobs, was not in favor. So she escalated me, right? Like, she's trying to take over, right? And so you have to do it at the tempo of the general rhythm of the group, right? Maybe you see things very clearly. I see things so clearly so often, but you have to slow down. So my mistake in life has been to want to go too fast.
Yeah, that's always the tension, right? I suspect you probably have very high EQ. I've met you a couple of times, and I suspect that's been my observation. I think that's really important. You have to be able to kind of like sense the pace of the organization and whether or not that person's ready to come along with you. Have you done the work with that person that you need to do to get them on board with your vision? And that's always a little bit of the tension there. So you just I think you have to just, once again, you have to be curious. You have to pay attention. So, and moving on to that, like, so creating change, right? So breaking through organizational silos is a hallmark of your career. And that's one of the biggest challenges we hear today from customers is engineering teams wanting to DIY AI translation solutions and bypass or eliminate the localization department. How would you handle that in today's world with what you've learned?
Well, I think that you can get into real trouble today with AI and LLMs just wanting to go straight through and in. But if you would have done this relationship and stakeholder management and not talk about translations or localization, but talk about features that are resonating and country managers that are ready to go and global strategy for the company, the conversation with engineering becomes easier, right? So of course you need to automate. You have to. There's no way around that, right? But the conversation, of course, and different companies have different models. So for example, at Procore, I had tripods everywhere. And a tripod in my world, the engineering lead, the product lead, the UX lead are as important. Not one is more important. So if the company has the squad or the tripod model, engineering cannot take over. But at NetApp, we had a very engineering driven organization where they would go straight in, So I can see that if the company is not really big and there's not many products, you are going to get a lot of pressure from engineering to take over by code, because nowadays these things are happening, right? Like CMSs can just grab it. Even at NetApp, we, with Kristen Kafer, who was the vice president of the marketing organization, we already had everything automated and lined up. But she understood that localizers were the ones looking at the output. And sometimes we would let the content go through, but we would send the localization people right after. So she would bypass it, but my agreement with her is like, okay, you want to go fast, but we are going to make some mistakes. And then the role for my team was to go and look at everything that was rendering in the UX on the applications and the websites to make sure that content was okay, because engineering, if they bypass the whole process, the local experience is going to break. It's really going to break. It's not all right. You have to validate. You have to understand. I think localization managers should understand local realities, not words. So go and understand how the product needs to work well in France and in Australia. I'm sure they're going to work differently, right? So I do think that localization managers need to find their space within product teams, within tripods, within the stakeholder groups, within the data that's moving the product locally along. not just in if the translation is well written or not. We have to move on from that.
Yeah.
Every single company I had to let go of localizers, and I would turn them into international product managers or international program managers, that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah, no, I love that. I think the pressure that we're feeling is, in this age of AI, right? 18-day turnaround, 15, 12, 7-day turnaround
It's
is
too
too
long.
long. It's
Yeah.
too long, right? I mean, everyone's expecting I'm creating content right now. I can create content in 30 seconds and I have to wait 7 days for a translation? No way. So I think that one of the big changes that we're helping our customers migrate through, and it's two things. One, it's a mindset, and the other thing is the technology, right? So the technology exists. So today with AI translation, integration that we do, right? So instant translation, on brand, quality assurance, it's very, very good, right? And then, so if you're forcing users, if they get frustrated, they're going to go around you. And if you've got a strong engineering department, they're going to be like, why are we waiting for this? We're just going to vibe code, and do an API call. And then now you're in a weird box. So I do think that it takes two to tango. So there's a technology shift.
Let me give you an example. My own little startup in India, right? Universalization.ai. I had a phone call with the CTO on yesterday, Sunday, and Sunday, 2 days ago. You never know what day it is anymore. And he's like, Anna, I localized the website in Hindi and in Catalan and Spanish. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
So I go and I look at the website and I'm like, man, that's not how we say things. And the labels, the where you have to find the labels were completely off. And I'm like, oh my God. And so then he was like, oh, can you correct the Catalan? I'm like, no.
Yeah. No.
Like you go do it well. We're localization experts. So when engineering takes over, you're going to have to know how to work with them. Either you do the reviews after and then send it to them and say, all this stuff came out because of your, speed. Speed is good, but speed is not always perfect, right? And so you do need, and hopefully you have enough product managers and different leads and stakeholders that you have a lot of work. That's why I was saying if it's a small company and it's just one product, you're going to suffer because they can't take over.
Yeah, no, that's just not scalable. I mean, there's a need for speed, but I think that what we found is we see a lot of examples of vibe coding, right? It's easy to vibe code, like we're doing it like crazy. It's relatively easy to vibe code a prototype over a weekend. It's another thing for it to be an enterprise grade solution that has all the capabilities around it that you need, like translation memory, glossary, quality assurance, connectors, workflow, compliance, analytics, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think, though, that, and this is where I think one of the remarkable capabilities of AI that's coming in is, right, in the past we were used to neural machine translation. That was like, okay, that's what it is. It's very utilitarian, and that's sort of our experience. What we're seeing now with AI is the ability to create these custom models that have linguistic assets like translation memory, glossary, terminology database, style guide, custom prompting, which actually does create a very, very good instant AI translation, right? So that gets you much further along than the old neural machine translation would get. And that scratches the itch for many people in the organization. And then having a workflow, to your point, which I like, is like, okay, if you guys want to push this now, we can push it now, but then let's make sure that we've got a workflow and a system where we can have in-country experts or marketing experts or whatever it is, actually do the review, make the edits that they need to, and then that backfills and corrects the translation itself. That to me is a model that seems to be successful in this world when people are looking for that instant translation capability.
I think that's where you have to be a really good negotiator and say, we're going to try it for a month. We're going to try for 2 months. And then I'm going to come back and tell you what happened, and then adjust the workflow. And I think I've, being president of Women in Localization, one of the co-founders, we're always telling people, please get out of just the translation business. You're in a company because they want the company to do really well. So what else can you do? You can get to know the local teams. You can get to know the country managers. You can get to know the objectives of the strategy of the company. That's what you want to push and align to. That's a lot of work just doing that. You can bring in a lot of intelligence. AI doesn't have that intelligence.
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot of work, and so we're actually doing. We're next week we're going out on the West Coast. We're doing road shows right now that actually help teach how to successfully implement AI translation workflows in your business. Because it's such a new technology. It's evolving so quickly. It's one of those things that 6 weeks ago we didn't know about Claude Code. Maybe
Exactly.
So fast, right? So how do I do these things at scale with success, and then have the quality assurances baked in that I need to have? Because I think what's the biggest fear of a localization manager? It's probably to get yelled at.
That the team gets trimmed down to the point that they do they do a takeover by code, and then the results into the local experience is not the one you want.
Yeah.
So it's very important that if you're a localization leader today, you really think, where do you want your team to be? Change their titles if you have to. We were constantly changing people's titles, right? Because there's always somebody thinking of, are we too many? Are we too, do we need to lay off people? So you have to be very on point all the time.
What do you think? When another department wants to, gets frustrated, right? And they put the localization department at risk. What's the number one cause, would you say? Why are they doing that? Is it cost? Is it quality? Is it speed? What is their frustration?
Cost. Well, in our case, was not usually cost, because we would pay. I had the cost center. The only time when somebody thought that they could do it better than me was a chief marketing officer at NetApp. And I can say it because I explained this when George Curran, the CEO, said, Anna, you've done such a great job in marketing and channel and support. I want you to go and do the same thing in R&D. So he wanted me to go work for him and take on engineering and product and all of that, where the CMO said, you can go, Anna, go ahead, but your team needs to stay here because it's my headcount. Mm-hmm. So that time, that was a fight. That was fight. But because I had so many stakeholders liking and vouching for what we were doing, that I went to Rob Salmon, who was the SVP of sales for NetApp, president of NetApp, and I said, Rob, I want to go and work for George, but I need to take my team with me. Without my team, I'm not anything. We don't need to restart everything. So he had to call her, and then, she was very upset that I escalated it. But she wanted to split the localization team, which was very interesting, because my localization team, some people wanted to come with me and some people wanted to become me in marketing. Mm-hmm. So it was very weird. But at the end of the day, we all moved. We've had escalations, of course, it's been quality escalations but not, it was usually quality,
Yeah.
Some translation that the country manager didn't think that it was well transcribed or localized enough. So the agency model wasn't working, for example.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting. I think the theme that I keep hearing from you is making sure that you've got those relationships across the organization. That's probably the number one takeaway from this.
And why your team is so important. You're the connector throughout the company on the global experience. Yes. Own that global experience, and nobody usually owns that. Even chief success officers or customer officers, support officers, they'll own customer support, but not the success. I always say, the success is not just that you give them support, is that they can use the product and that they can read the instructions, that they can install it without problems. So we would own the mess, like let's make that customer super, super successful. And they saw us so crazy about that, right?
I think this is one of the really interesting parts about localization, right? It's really internationalization, right? When you think about, if I'm a marketer, I'm thinking about my ICP, I'm thinking about my personas, I'm creating personalized pain points, I'm doing all of this work, I'm doing it monolingually, right? And then when I go to do that globally, right? If I take all that hard work and then to create this personalization, and then I push it into other countries, if I do it without localization, I've completely wasted all that effort and that money, right? Because now it's going to land it's in English, it's going to land in France or Germany, totally flat.
When I'm hearing you talk, something comes to mind that really was very helpful to my teams. If companies have customer surveys twice a year, once a quarter, you have to embed the linguistic experience and the local usability experience of the product. That gives a lot of work.
That's a great
And
idea.
people will come back with like pricing issues or features. We want more features. We would funnel all of that from the global and international customers. We would do our own reports and then go into the stakeholders and say, look at what customers in Spain are saying or customers in Argentina are saying, right?
I love that idea. So adding to the product satisfaction survey, an element of localization, right? So are you satisfied with this product? You're going to get real feedback on that. I love that. I don't know if you ever had an experience. A lot of our customers, in my experience going back in the day, are, A/B testing or pre-post, right? So localized shopping cart, non-localized shopping cart. What was my conversion rate? Was there a difference? We've seen, some pretty dramatic results with localization, improving conversion rate or engagement 20 to 70%. I don't know if you've ever had any experience doing that.
Of course. Analytics. One of my most favorite jobs was to work for the Palo Alto Research Center at PARC at Xerox in Palo Alto, where Steve Jobs used to go and steal a ton of ideas.
Yes, steal ideas. Yes.
That is where we would test exactly this. What if you put this button to the right? And what if the mouse was rounder? And what if this label is localized or not? So I understood that it needs to feel so native, so easy, so simple. Don't make me think. Like the do not make me think came out of PARC. It's just don't make it difficult for me, right? That's one thing. The other thing is, and you come from eBay, a broken link at eBay was like a disaster, right? Because it was the same when we worked at VeriSign with Eva and Sylvia, my co-founders for Women in Localization. And VeriSign was all e-commerce, 100%. So if a link was broken and a label was misused or a translation wasn't right, we would be missing a ton of money, and we knew how much money.
Oh, God. Yeah. I mean, conversion rate is, we used to get super excited about 6 bips of conversion rate improvement, right? So, if you can drive anything near that or above by localizing, which I think is relatively, which I think is in the ballpark, you've got a huge win. So I think one of the big opportunities for localization departments is to get to know their product counterparts better, their UX counterparts, and propose these sorts of experiments and measure the impact of these things, because that's what gives you that credibility. I always kind of say, like, at the end of the day, we were talking a little bit about speed, quality, cost, right? Those are really important operational metrics. But what the company cares about, what the C-suite cares about, is revenue growth, gross margin, EBITDA. So layering your pitch, like what, if you're going forward and advocating for something for your department, being able to speak in that C-suite language is essential. Otherwise, right? Otherwise they just
And I think this is why I ended up being a general manager at Procore, right? So I started as a translator, a program manager, project manager. I've had all the titles in the scale, up and down, right? But when I was at NetApp, Procore came and said, we want you. I'm like, no, thank you. I'm really having a great time at NetApp. But then they said, what role would you like at Procore? So I'm like, I want to be in charge of product, international product. I want to have this. I ended up with 11 teams, right? I was the general manager, but one of them, I was like, I want my localizers to sit in product. I want them to sit in product, and I want the technical writers together. Oh my God,
Yes.
this was the most beautiful thing ever, because they would think about the features, and the localizers were hearing this.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yes.
designed the most beautiful thing, because usually you get it after. You're like, go and localize this stuff. No. These people were allowed to be on the phone calls. We're the best product managers in the world, right? Some of the best product managers in the world at Procore, thinking of the user experience. And imagine if a localizer can say, I've spoken with enough French customers to know that they don't need this. Wow.
Yeah, I love that. I have heard this is something I've heard time and time again. One of the best practices, the most successful localization people, and Martinho from Netflix and Spotify was just talking about this the other day in one of our workshops. Putting yourself at the seat of the table of your stakeholders and being a part of that discussion, as you just described, is essential, right? Because if you're the tail end, if they throw it over the wall and say, hey, we're all done with this, now localize it, now you're the bottleneck, right? And everyone hates a bottleneck, right? Wait, why wasn't this, I finished this, why isn't it live? Well, we're waiting 14 days for the translation, right?
Yeah.
That's not great.
Yeah.
So but by pulling yourself forward and being a part of that process, listening to it, understanding it, and being an advisor in that role, now all of a sudden they're looking to you for advice on localization, how to improve the experience for the customer. And that's a very, very different position from being, hey, the translation people at the end that are the bottleneck. So I think that's super great and then super important in this day and age. That's awesome.
And I know that every company thinks differently. The executives want different teams and stuff, but you are the one that needs to build your value. And you need to navigate that. And it's not going to be the same in each company where you are, but you need to be super alert and intentional.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure. Moving on. So I know that another topic of conversation, another thing that people are going through right now is what we'll call surviving reorganizations and maintaining momentum. Yeah. So you've been through every type of reorganization, centralized and split, move from one department to another, team cuts. What happens when you wake up one day and everything has changed?
Well, usually I was the one that had to make the change. I would get the phone call the day before. It's like, Anna, tomorrow you have to do this, right?
Yep.
So I think one of the things in being a program manager or a senior program manager or director, I'm not going to go into senior director and up. They usually are really good at this already, but it's to be very mentally strong and centered. Because the shock of losing your manager, having to change teams, going through reorgs, being the only one that survived, being let go. I've been let go. All of this is really tough. And so maybe you mourn it for a little bit, and then you have to get your act together, right? And then if you're one of the few people that stay, or one of the folks that stay, or you need to change teams, well, you got to start all over again. I always think, like, what if today was my first day? Sometimes, you have to think of, like, what do I do? I'm still here. I have a new boss. What does a professional do? Get to know them, and you start all over again, and create the relationships, because people are everything. People are everything. You can get pressure from engineering, you can get pressure from your executives, but those relationships and the value to the company is very, very important. So you're going to have to start all over again.
Yeah. I think that's a great.
It happens. It's inevitable. It will happen. It happens.
Yeah. I think that's a great piece of advice. I think about myself. I'm a very impatient person. And so when I have to educate someone new, right, I'm like, oh, God,
Yeah.
Let's just hope. Okay, you can't do that, right? You have to take a deep breath and you have to understand. Okay, this is a new person. This is a new stakeholder. This is an important new team member here. I need to take the time to have a conversation, build a relationship with this person first, and then educate them on the value that we can help create for them. Right. And I think it's important for you to take your time and do that properly rather than being frustrated, which is a very natural human reaction.
I think you get frustrated first, you go, maybe go out for a day, and then you start all over again. And not only like, hi, this is Anna Schlegel, and actually studying this person. If it's an executive, you want to study them. You want to ask people like, hey, what's the style? In my team, we were always studying like, who are the key stakeholders? Who are they? Are they introverted? Are they extroverted? What do they like? Like an external customer to the company, we would treat these stakeholders the same way. Yeah. And this is corporate strategy. And we would always do corporate strategy. Who is in favor of my team? Who's not in favor of my team? Mm-hmm. How are we, how are we helping them? What are we missing? We're constantly doing this internal stakeholder management, account management, basically internally, right?
Yeah, I think that's a tremendous. Once again, that's gold. I think that's a tremendous way to look at it. I don't know. I thought that way. I don't know what percentage of people think that way, but it's really critical. Once again, understanding, hey, this is this is part of my team. This is part of the matrix here. What makes this person tick? What do they need? What's important to them, and how can I service that need? And that's our job as teammates. We're all part of an organization where we're helping each other towards a common goal. So it's always important to remember that.
Yeah, even if you want to scream, you have to calm down.
Yeah, you can go outside and scream.
Yeah, start all over again, super professional, as if you were just hired. If you were this incredible hired, newly fresh professional, you start positive. Okay, here we go, patiently have to start over and over and over.
Yes, that is part of it. It always goes on. Kind of switching themes here a little bit. You've had really incredible success, and I want to ask you a little bit about what it actually takes to break through to the VP to the GM level. I think there's a lot of people watching this webinar that have aspirations for that. So you're probably the only localization professional to reach general manager at Procore. That's extremely rare. What did it take to break through to that level, to earn that seat at the table?
35 years. I don't know. It took a lot. It took me taking every single class that they would recommend and then some, right? So I took like how to listen to people, how to pitch to an executive, how to work virtually, how to write a good summary, how to speak at a board. I took a lot of classes. As you said, I was 5 years at Stanford learning. I've gone through 5 university degrees, so always learning and trying it out, and never asking for a promotion, never, but always showing like, look at this, look at what we've achieved. Oh my God, this is incredible. The team deserves, the best. Always portraying the team, always portraying the success of the customer. I do have to say that I would not ask for a promotion, but if I felt that I was not getting higher, I would change companies. And that's why I've been at 7, right? Mm-hmm. When I was good with Cisco, I went to Xerox. When I was good with Xerox, I went to VMware. And I went jumping. And of course, when you jump, that's the time if a company comes and says, I want you, that's the time that you're like, many companies, when I was a VP, they wanted to give me director titles at Amazon and Meta and Google. I was like, no, it's okay, it's fine. A title, I think, especially for a woman, is very, very important. It took so much to work weekends and travel. And I was like very quickly like global services and flights. It took a lot. It took a lot of years and classes. And again, this great stakeholder management, getting sponsors, not mentors, sponsors.
Yes.
Like, and creating it, at NetApp, I was the chair for women in tech for 11 years. So I created the programs.
Yeah.
Women in localization, we created this. So I've always created what I wanted because I couldn't see it,
Yeah.
Um,
I think that's a great point. You gotta, I think in big companies, especially, you've got to have a sponsor. You've got to identify that person that's
oh
going
my
to want to
goodness. Yeah.
invest in your
and
career.
and also ask, and I would ask, and I got a ton of coaches, and I put myself through all the 360s, and these are my strengths, and these where I suck, like, and I would ask my boss, like, what's the one thing out of all these 10 things that I suck at? Like, if I did this one thing, what would be the best for the team or the company?
Mhm.
And so you have to be very humble, very receptive to feedback, at that level. And each level is different. I remember when I made director, I was like, oh my God, I made director, and somebody said, yeah, watch out. Now you have like a big, they're all going to shoot at you because you're the director. Right?
Oh no, that's amazing. If you ever come to work at Smartling, you go through an onboarding class, and so anyone that's in the company has heard me say this, but this was advice that I got when I had just recently graduated, and I got it from just a gentleman that is kind of like at the pinnacle of business success. He was president of IBM. He's on the board of Oracle, Harley Davidson, Cardinal Health, etc. And I asked George, I said, George, what advice do you have for me? And he said, hit your numbers and raise your hand. And that's advice that I've carried through to becoming a CEO. I've actually modified that slightly. I've added invest in yourself. And I love that you said that about, taking the classes, getting that 360 feedback and really understanding it. I remember the first time, I've been an entrepreneur and a CEO, right? So like no one ever gave me, feedback for real. And I went to work for eBay and I had my first
Oh,
I had my first review session. You can imagine how that went, and but it was really amazing. After I walked out of the building, took a long walk around, San Jose, and recomposed myself. I went back in and I said, you know what? That's actually super helpful. Can you help me understand, like, really where do I need to focus? And that was amazing. I always laugh, like, I'm married, so I get feedback every day. But you got to take that feedback and really apply it. Your natural action, of course, I had to go take a walk, but then I realized, I'm like, you know what? She was right. And I was wrong. And this is a great learning opportunity. So that's part of investing in yourself. You have to have that awareness and be willing to make that investment.
the higher you go, when I make vice president, first time I made vice president, my coach said, Anna, there's different types of vice presidents, because I said, oh my God, I'm a vice president. What do I do now? And he said, don't worry, you're already working like a vice president. I said, no, I wasn't,
Yeah.
And he said, there's different styles. And the style that I chose was to not give the solution, but to lead people towards the right answer. And so it was a lot about listening. I had to learn really well how to listen because engineers, product managers, product leaders, localizers, they all have great ideas, but sometimes they don't know how to say it, And so my job was like, okay, tell me more. Why are you saying this? Where have you seen this? And kind of come out with like something really strong, right? So asking good questions was always part of, my first role as a VP. When you're a GM, that's a whole other story. You're like, it's all about revenue and stability and whatever the society is going through and different. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, we're coming up to the end here. Before we go into the Q&A session, we always love to leave people with some actionable insights. So what can you do now to be successful? What would you recommend that people do? If someone listening today wants to make immediate progress, what are one or several things they can do this week?
2 things on your own. Who works for you? Write it down. Are they helping or are they not helping? And then I think the second thing is, who are the stakeholders that you're not working well with or that you haven't talked to yet, make a list and go and start talking to them. Those two things are very powerful. Who works for you will make you or break you. And then stakeholders, you need to have the whole company, corporate environment on your radar and on your side.
Amazing. I love that. Any other suggestions?
To learn how to breathe and learn strategy and learn psychology. Those are the things that helped me the most. I think this is why I broke off from, staying as a localization manager, the EQ part, how to ask, how to listen, how to love your stakeholders and your team.
Yeah, so important. This investing in yourself that, a lot of people, they want training, right? And so a lot of times they're asking, for the company, we want more training. And I think that training is 20% company, 80% you. You have to invest in yourself. You have to be intellectually curious, and you are the keeper of yourself. So I've done it. I do it myself all the time, still every day. I try and learn, get a little bit better, and I think that's a super important thing. Well, this has been amazing, Anna. This is truly a masterclass. So I'm going to switch it over here. We've got some questions here that are coming in. So let me ask the first one here.
Anna Paterina says, how do you learn strategy? I'm going to write down, I wrote a book about this, Truly Global. It's been released a couple times, Anna, but this is the book. It's a small book. You can find it on Amazon, but it's called Truly Global. And it's how do you come up with this strategy? Who do you hire? Who are your stakeholders? How do you talk about yourself? It's like this whole orchestration. I always call it this whole orchestra, and you're an operator. It's almost like you feel like you own the enterprise inside the company to make it all go well, to represent your team really well, and to think for the business, right?
I love it. So there's a book. We can get the book.
I wrote the book because I was so tired. Every time I went in, the VPs and the CEOs like, what is this globalization stuff? I'm like, here's
the book.
Yeah,
I love that. All right.
Yeah.
So this is kind of related, but so like obviously we've got a lot of experience engaging with C-suite executives. Some of our listeners may not have had that opportunity yet, or feel like they lack the skills or confidence to start those conversations. Could you share a couple of lessons on from your experience on how do I help them how should they take that first step towards communicating with a C-suite executive?
So I think part of when I was at VeriSign, I was never able to talk to the C-suite. So depending on how old and how much experience you have, this is why we created Women in Localization, because at VeriSign, I was the executive producer and no C-level person wanted to ever talk to me. I was like, oh. So start, because sometimes it's hard because your boss doesn't like it if you talk to their boss's boss's boss. So maybe start with the different department at somebody at your level, like to understand how that department is run and who's the leader. And if the company policy is open door, it's very easy. And if they mean it, it's very easy. If you work at Google, you can talk to anybody, right? But there are companies that Apple, you have to be very much in your lane. So I would say, how do you start? By finding some friends, maybe one or two stakeholders that you didn't have, and be like a little bit of a journalist, like what countries are important to you and how do you use the product and what languages have you ever talked to somebody in country and explain how your product resonates in different areas. So you have to go prepared.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I love that. And this is another great question. What advice would you give to women in localization who want to break through to leadership but feel they face gender barriers?
So we always ask that women align to, if inside the company there is like a women ERG, right? Women in tech or women in Hispanic women, or there's usually sometimes only been at Fortune companies, so we always had these groups.
Yep.
And if there is no group, go ahead and create it. This is what I've done. I've always founding stuff that you cannot see. Okay. And you don't need to call it much of anything. Go and grab 3 women first Monday of the month, and you grab lunch, and then you bring a couple executives. There's a lot of male executives that want to help. So invite one, like, how would you do this? How do you see this? So it's either through the ERG or you're going to have to create it yourself. What's not good is just to sulk in it and stay in it and not do anything about it. If you're in a terrible situation, change teams, change departments, go to HR, that kind of stuff. But join women in localization. There's a lot of ideas, good communities. You can talk to other women in tech in other companies as well.
Yeah, I agree. Join women. If you're not a member of Women in Localization, join women. Just join Women in Localization. That's a great start.
Or send me a message through LinkedIn and say like, hey, I heard you and Brian talk, and I'll give you some ideas.
Yeah, no, I love that. Thank you. I've got a couple more here. I think these are great. So this one I love. So the question is, you've run a nation, companies, served on boards. Do you use the same playbook across all of them?
If what? Sorry, I have.
So the question is, you've run a nation, companies, because you're in government, served on boards. So government, companies, and boards. Do you use the same playbook across all of them?
Oh, no. No, but the stakeholder management is very real. So some of these things, I'm going to lie, like being centered, and I learned how to breathe and yoga and run. Being strong, being positive in the morning is good for your marriage, is good as a parent, is good for your government or nonprofits or corporate, right? Like you have to be yourself, and that means your best self, right? Is when you're the best centered, and that means getting up a little early and doing the things you have to do to start the day really well. Stakeholder management is important. I do have to tell you that there's some politics in companies, but politics is full of companies, full of politics is full of politics 100%. So that's very different. So, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Last question. It's a little bit tactical, but I think it's a good one because I think it applies to a lot of folks that are probably listening. What if you're in a company with multiple competing localization teams or approaches? How do you unify them?
I've had that. Well, why did you join that company? So some companies do it on purpose, and it's necessary, right? Like, for example, at Xerox was so huge. We were 130,000 employees. Yeah. So I was in R&D. So I was able to consolidate R&D, but we wouldn't touch marketing as an example, right? Apple, right, has different localization teams. Amazon, I was actually interviewed for that role where there's a central team and then there's different ones, and they were trying to do that at Amazon. If you're the one that really wants to do this, LinkedIn me. It's complex. It depends on the appetite for the company to centralize and the support that you would get from the executives to do something like that. And you need to go in with a beautiful pitch as to why this is better. To me, centralized is better, but I understand that companies like Apple, they have to do it separately, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. That's one of the biggest challenges I think I would see out there. So I think that's great advice. So Anna, we're at the end of our masterclass here. This has been amazing. I learned a lot. I hope everyone here, I know everyone here has learned a lot. This has really been truly a great discussion. So thank you so much for sharing your insights. If you want to go deeper on building influence and breaking into the C-suite, please join us at our Global Ready Conference. It's our annual conference where localization community comes together to learn from industry leaders, share best practices, and shape the future of global content. If you're interested, you can register using the link in chat. But I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I've enjoyed this discussion. I've enjoyed our previous discussions, and I'm looking forward to seeing you as soon as possible.
Thank you so much, Brian. Thank you so much for all your words. I also learned a lot from you. So thank you, very kind.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.